Continuing with Plato's sun, line, and cave, we're now going to talk about the allegory of the cave. The allegory of the cave is one of the most famous passages in Western literature. It's been extremely influential on many, many, many thinkers. And Plato did something brilliant here. As I said at the end of the talk on the divided line, he realizes, being the good student of Socrates, he realizes, I've got to go back and I've got to relate this to the question of how we ought to live our lives. And he does that, but he does something very clever. He takes one of the most universal of mythic forms, the myth of the heroic journey, and he uses that in order to illustrate what this has to do with how we live our lives. The myth of the heroic journey has been talked about by many, many thinkers, particularly by modern thinkers. It's ubiquitous in ancient literature. It's ubiquitous in literature. It has certain features in common every time it's told. Someone is living an ordinary life, and somehow they receive a calling. It may be someone they meet, it may be some experience they have, but they realize that there's something special that they have to do. And part of the problem is they don't quite know what it is. At first, there's a refusal of the calling. I don't want to do this, right? Leave me alone, I want to live my life. But then they realize that the calling is too strong. They have to. They have to go on this remarkable journey. On that journey, they encounter all kinds of difficulties, puzzles they must solve, foes that they must overcome, and they must overcome those foes by dealing with their own shortcomings, their own vices. Okay? So this is essentially their character growing through this journey, through all the trials they face on that journey. Eventually, they reach their goal. Everything becomes clear to them, and that causes a transformation. They finally see who they really are, their own true nature. They see what they have to do. Having seen that, they also realize that they have to return to their point of origin, to share that gift with everyone else. Many people will say, that's silly, we knew you when you were a kid. How can you possibly say that you've had this transformative experience, you have this special gift? That's nonsense, go away. But others will say, wait, I want to hear this, because I too have kind of felt that there's more to life than I've just been experiencing my ordinary life. And you become the source of the calling to other people, who then will embark on their journey. Now, whose story is that? Well, let's see. Jesus, Buddha, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, what is his name? Han Solo, sure. Luke Skywalker. Right? Actually, George Lucas engaged Joseph Campbell, one of the world's great scholars of mythology, to be a story consultant on the original Star Wars movie. And one of the reasons I think why the movie grasped people's consciousness so vividly is because there were some very, very deep and universal mythic forms that were being represented. The great psychoanalyst Carl Jung said, really, that's a lot of popular culture should be understood that way. This is a sort of a dumbed-down version of a very universal myth. And it's really not the medium that gets us, it's the myth that still resonates with something deep inside of us. Well, okay, who else? How about you? Right? You're going to college. You weren't satisfied with just, a life of, do you want fries with that? You felt that there was something you needed to do, and you're now on this journey that has, of course, all kinds of trials, all kinds of demands of you, and at some point you're going to realize what you're really capable of and what you really have to share with the world. Okay, yeah, this is a very remarkable, very remarkably powerful myth. I've had people who have written on the allegory of the cave for this course who have said, this essentially is the perfect allegory for this terribly abusive relationship I was in, and I managed to finally get myself out of it. Or this is essentially the story of my own road to recovery. Okay, so yeah, this is It's just brilliant on his part. First of all, it's amazing that everything he achieved intellectually with the metaphor of the sun and the divided line, the realization that the role that universals or abstract general properties play in our knowledge, that after all that, he says, yeah, but it's not complete without this normative dimension, this dimension that has to do with our values and how we live our lives. He goes back and does this, and he does it so brilliantly. So, starts off, here we are, chained in the bottom of a cave. All we can see are the shadows on the wall. We've been chained in that position for so long that we've become convinced that nothing is real except for those shadows. Those shadows are the real world. A person who is really bright, who is really successful, is a person who learns all about the shadows and begins to be able to predict what the shadows will do. What we don't see is that there's someone back here moving, if you will, puppets and things around with a fire burning behind them and casting those shadows. Okay? In other words, those people are playing these people. They, like these people, don't actually know that there's anything outside the cave. They themselves believe that they are the creators of reality. Okay? Clearly there's some sharp social criticism here in Plato's thought as well. The sophists, the cunning political leaders, the people who create the illusions that bamboozle these people who are chained by their own ignorance, by their own passions, by their own prejudices. These people don't really understand that there is anything beyond the illusions they themselves are creating. We heard that before, right? There is no art of navigation. Anybody can navigate as well as anybody else. So, at some point, someone here realizes he has the power to stand up and turn around and see where the shadows are coming from. How does that happen? Well, the calling can happen in any number of ways. Okay? There's an old Peanuts cartoon in which Lucy Van Pelt, I hope you know who she is. People seem to still know who the Peanuts characters are, but Lucy's in a crib and she's got a hold of the bars and she's yelling, "Daddy, I want to get out." Then you see her climbing up the bars. "Daddy, I want to get out." Then she's going over the top of the bars. "Daddy, I want to get out." And she's climbing down the outside of the crib. "Daddy, I want to get out." Then she's running down the hall. "Daddy, I want to get out." Suddenly she stops dead in her tracks, her eyes wide, and says, "I am out." I saved that, from years ago when I first saw it. I thought that's very Zen-like, actually. Wait a minute, I'm already out. The only thing that had me trapped was that I thought I was trapped. Well, okay, what's got us trapped in the bottom of the cave? Our own illusions, our own attachment to illusions, our own intellectual laziness, our own biases, our own ignorance. We're chained down here, and we forge the chains ourselves, and as long as we don't understand that, we think that's just the way the world is. Carl Jung, who I've mentioned a few times, once said, "Until you face the unconscious, it will remain hidden from you, but it will still control your life. And you'll just call it fate." Okay, well, it isn't fate. It's something you're doing. So, we all have the ability to stop forging those chains, to stop chaining ourselves, to stand up and turn around and see where the light's coming from. It is difficult to make your way out of that cave. And as you're coming to increasing degrees of illumination, as Socrates puts it, your eyes are going to hurt. It's going to be difficult sometimes. You're used to stumbling around in the darkness. You have to get used to the light. And that can be painful at first. You're going to do something that even these people who are casting the shadows aren't able to do. You're going to leave the cave. You're the person who is actually facing the illuminated world. Not these people. They're facing down into the darkness because they are obsessed with the shadows as much as the people who are chained down here. They are as much a slave to the shadows as these people. They just don't get it. You get out into the illuminated world, and at first there's so much light, it's very difficult. You look at the reflections of illuminated objects, say in pools of water. When your eyes get used to that, you start looking at the illuminated objects themselves. When your eyes get used to that, you finally turn and you gaze at the sun. You see the sun itself. Now understand how this relates to the divided line. This is all the lower part of the divided line, the world of opinion, the world of becoming. You step out into the world of being, into the world into the intelligible world. You at first have the laws, the realm of lawful relationships, which are simply reflections of universals. Then you're able to actually see the universals themselves. And then if you keep going, you finally, beyond language, beyond concept, have the direct experience of the form of the good. Now, people sometimes will say, well, Plato is supposed to be a good writer. Doesn't he know you can't look directly at the sun without going blind? My classics professor, who was an amazing man, he was rumored to have actually studied with Aristotle. A very, very old fellow, but and
He sounded like the voice of God.
Amazing man. He used to point out that the exact place where a metaphor becomes really illuminating is at the point where it breaks down. Because you've seen there are these similarities and these similarities and these similarities. Now you see the crucial difference. Okay? We can't look directly at the sun without blasting our eyes because the sun is an external energy. The form of the good, or if you will, primal being, is our true nature. At the point where we fully behold the form of the good, we're seeing our own true nature, and we realize it was never the light before the eyes. It was always the light within our own eyes looking out, and now we see that. Okay. I had a student a number of years ago who took the intro philosophy course, and a couple of months after the course was over, like in the middle of the summer, I suddenly got an email from her saying, I get it. I finally get it. I am the sun. I've been the sun all along. And I thought, yay! Right? You plant the seed and the sun makes it grow. There's an old reference again to Zen Buddhism, and there's an old Zen Buddhist saying, when you're unenlightened, Zen is the light before your eyes that you're pursuing, but when you finally become enlightened, you realize that it was the light within your eyes all along. And you've always carried it with you. Okay, now here is the great transformation. You realize your true nature. You've struggled all your way out of the cave. You realize your true nature, and that changes you. It changes your understanding of who you are. It changes your understanding of everything. Then what do? What does the sun do? The sun provides light, which allows for illumination, which allows us to see, which allows us to not stumble around ignorantly in the dark. Being gives us reality, which makes truth possible, which makes knowledge possible. When you realize that the form of the good is your true nature, you do exactly what the form of the good does. You descend into the darkness, bringing illumination, bringing possibilities where there was only slavery before, bringing that freedom that you have yourself realized. You carry that down as much as you can. Okay? Now, are you going to get a good reception? Among some people, perhaps. But very frequently, people are going to say, you're crazy. Stumbling out of that cave it's blinded you. You're not good at manipulating the shadows, just like the sailors said. The navigator doesn't know anything useful. He's a useless stargazer. We should throw him overboard if he keeps annoying us. But there are going to be some people who say, this is really intriguing, and this sounds like something I've suspected all along. So let me listen, and then let me maybe try it myself. Of course, when they see that there are talented young people who are giving up becoming masters of the shadows in order to get out of the cave and gaze at the sun, they may charge you with corrupting the youth of Athens and execute you, which is exactly what happened to Socrates, or they may crucify you, which is what happened to Jesus. Nobody killed Buddha, but there were plenty of Brahmins who would have loved to do so if they thought they could get away with it. From the time Muhammad first started talking out against the superstitions and the oppression and the exploitation of ordinary people, all the entrenched powers were trying to kill him. Right? Okay, you've probably seen The Matrix. So this may be striking a familiar bell with you. Actually, the Wachowski brothers, I believe, I never pronounce their names exactly right, but Wachowski brothers said that there are several sources for the film The Matrix, several inspirations. One was the visual, the way it was visually realized was inspired by a classic anime that to this day they will not mention by name because they're afraid they'll be sued, but it's an open secret. It's Ghost in the Shell. And the other was the work of a contemporary French philosopher. That French philosopher was talking essentially about Plato's allegory of the cave for contemporary times given our technology. And what he was essentially saying was, we're in an even worse situation. These people were trying to liberate themselves from the chains, from the illusions created by their own egos, their own ignorance, their own biases, their own passions. We have built on top of that old layer of illusion a completely new layer of artificially generated illusions. You'd have to drill down through that layer of artificially generated illusions, which is where most of us live, to actually get to the old layer of illusions that people have for millennia been trying to escape from. So if anything, our situation is worse. There's a film called, another popular culture reference here, film by Bertolucci, an Italian filmmaker, and I don't personally consider it one of its better films. It's kind of rather old film. You probably won't have an opportunity to see it. And I'm not saying go right out and see it, but it's called The Conformist, and it's about a man who is pretty much a non-entity. And he's living in Italy at the time that fascism is on the rise in Italy. And little by little by little, he's compromising himself, until finally he doesn't recognize himself anymore. And at one point he goes to talk with one of his old college professors. And he asks the professor, what is happening to us? What's going on? How are we changing ourselves in this way? And his professor sits back and says, we are chained by our own fears. We're chained in the bottom of a cave and all we can see is the shadows. And if we remain here long enough, we'll become convinced that there never was anything but the shadows. I remember thinking when I heard that, wow. Okay, Nazism explained in terms of Plato's allegory of the cave. Well, why not? Once you understand the power of this allegory, it has such tremendous applicability. Okay, so why become a navigator? Why get out of the cave? Because as Bertrand Russell put it, the good life is the life guided by reason and inspired by love. You got to do both. And the form of the good is about both. Plato, Russell in his last chapter says something to the effect of, well, Plato, I think it's the last chapter, says something to the effect of, well, Plato is very interested in this abstract world. If you like the flesh and blood world of human relationships, you probably won't find Plato appealing. The fact is, Plato mentions love in his dialogues 4 times as often as he mentions logic. He understood, it's not enough simply to be able to see clearly, you also have to care. This is a liberation not only of the intellect, but of the heart. It's a liberation of your entire being. If you don't understand it that way, you don't get the transformation. You don't just learn something really cool and then go back and tell other people, hey, you're idiots, you don't know anything. You become something different. Okay? And this is, I think, the key to understanding what Plato's philosophical career was really all about and what he saw in Socrates.